Welcome to this another class on World History. World History 4. We're going to pick up where we left off. We're going to start on the new sub point, the Great Leap Backward. Let us pray. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for this class. Thank you, Lord, for participants in this class. I pray you give them strength. I ask for your strength. I ask for your guidance. I ask for your blessing. Lord, I ask for your leadership and your deliverance. I pray, Lord, that you stand by me. I pray, Lord, you uphold me with a righteous right hand. I pray, Lord, for the system now engaged in this class possible, that you bless it. In the precious name I pray, amen. So, World History 4, and we are moving down. We have 9 classes to go, 9 videos. And we're picking up at the Great Leap Backward. With political opposition within the party, an army apparently in check, or in prison, Mao and his supporters launched the Great Leap Forward in 1958. The programs of the Great Leap were a further effort to revitalize the flagging revolution by restoring its mass rural base rather than huge plants located in the cities. Industrialization would be pushed through small-scale projects integrated into the peasant communes. Instead of the communes' surplus being siphoned off to build steel mills, industrial development would be aimed at producing tractors, cement for irrigation projects, and other manufacturers needed by the peasantry. Enormous publicity was given to efforts to produce steel in backward furnaces that relied on labor rather than machine intensive techniques. You know the meaning of that. You should know the meaning of that. The meaning of that is expensive steel being produced inefficiently and costly. So you can't export it because they would not be able to compete with steel prices on the open market or in other countries. So this is a he says great leap forward, that's a great leap backward. Mao preached the benefits of backwardness and the joys of mass involvement, and he looked forward to the withering away of the meddling bureaucracy. Emphasis was placed on self-reliance within the peasant communes. That is familiar, that's a familiar expression. In the 1970s, Jamaica had a prime minister by the name of Michael Manley, and he came to power in 1972, and about 1974 he introduced democratic socialism to Jamaica, and he was talking about self-reliance, plant a backyard garden, that can't build a country. You don't have to buy tomatoes, you don't, but you need money to spend, and you need products to export to earn foreign exchange, to buy what you don't have. You need that self-reliance, and Jamaica has been set back from the 1970s to present as a result of that setback. So Mao Michael Manley followed in Maho footsteps because Maho predated him. Maho died sometimes in the 70s. Michael Manley came to power in 1972. Maho came to power 1949. And he preached the benefits of backwardness and the joys of mass involvement. And he looked forward to the withering away of the meddling bureaucracy. Emphasis was placed on self reliance within the peasant communes. All aspects of the lives of their members were regulated and regimented by the commune leaders and the heads of the local labor brigades. Within months after it was launched, all indicators suggested that the Great Leap Forward and the rapid collectivization were leading to economic disaster. Peasant resistance to collectivization, the abuses of commune leaders, and the dismal output of the backyard factories combined with drought to turn the Great Leap into a giant step backward. The worst famine of the communist era spread across China. Wow. For the first time since 1949, China had to import large amounts of grain to feed its people, and the numbers of Chinese to feed continued to grow at an alarming rate, defiantly rejecting Western and United Nations proposals for family planning. Mao and like-thinking radicals charged that socialist China could care for its people, no matter how many they were. Birth control was seen as a symptom of capitalist selfishness and inability to provide a decent living for all of the people. By now, we had become old and out of date. Like those of India, China's birth rates were actually a good deal lower than those of many emerging nations. Mhm. Also, like India, however, the Chinese, also like India, however, the Chinese were adding people to a massive population base. At the time of the communist rise to power, China had approximately 550 million people. By 1965, this had risen to approximately 750 million. If that rate of growth had continued, some experts at the time predicted that China would have 1.8 billion people by the year 2000. Well, they don't have 1.8 billion, but they have 1.4 plus billion. In the face of the environmental degradation and overcrowding that this leap in the population produced, even the party ideologues came around to the view that something must be done to curb the birth rate. Beginning in the mid 1960s, the government launched a nationwide family planning campaign designed to limit urban peoples to 2 children and those in rural areas to 1. By the early 1970s, these targets had been revised to 2 children for either urban or rural peoples, but by the 1980s, just 1 child per family was allowed. Although there is evidence of official excesses, undue pressure for women to have abortions, for example, these programs have greatly reduced the birth rate and have begun to slow China's overall population increase. But again, the base to which new births are added is already so large that China's population will not stabilize until into the 21st century. By that time, there'll be far more people than now to educate, feed, house, and provide with productive work, because the base is already large. So if you have 100 million, say you have 200 million and 100 million people are at age to have children, one per child, 100 million is a lot. one child per family. One child per family is a lot, as against in a population with 50 million and 25 million people are at the age to have children. One per one child per family is is fewer than one per family with the to 100 million population people, and the Chinese population is much larger. In a context where you have um, 500 million, roughly 250 million people are at the age to have children. So you can work the figures out. Advances made in the first decade of the new regime were lost to amateurish blunders, excesses of overzealous cadre leaders, and students meddling. China's national productivity fell by as much as 25%. And you know, it had been bad. People were eating people. People had been eating people. And for the national productivity to fall this dramatically, it tells you that they were going back to those days. Population increase soon overwhelmed the stagnating productivity of the agri- agri- agricultural and industrial sectors. By 1960, it was clear that the Great Leap must be ended and a new course of development adopted. Mao lost his position as state chairman, although he remained the head of the party's central committee. The pragmatists, including Mao's old ally Zhou Enlai, along with Liu and others, came to power determined to restore state direction and market incentives at the local level. Women hold up half of the heavens. We're going to look at this subpoint. In Mao's struggles to renew the revolutionary fervor of the Chinese people, his wife Jiang Qin played an increasingly prominent role. Mao's reliance on her was consistent with the commitment to the liberation of Chinese women he had acted upon throughout his political career. As a young man, he had been deeply moved by a newspaper story about a young lady, a young girl who had committed suicide rather than be forced by her family to submit to the marriage they had arranged for her with a rich but very old man. From that point onward, women's issues and women's support for the communist movement became important part of Mao's revolutionary strategy. Here he was drawing on a well-established revolutionary tradition, but women had been very active in the Taiping Rebellion of the mid-19th century, the Boxer Revolt in 1900, and the 1911 revolution that had toppled the Manchu regime. One of the key causes taken up by the May 4th intellectuals who had a great impact on the youthful Zedong, Mao Zedong, was women's rights. Their efforts put an end to foot binding. My God. Early on, we saw what what used to take place in terms of foot binding for women. They were not able to walk, to have their feet, keep their feet normal. Their toes were bound. Bound. I don't want to describe it. If you do all the classes, you'll come up on it. It's just terrible. Terrible. My God, man. It was terrible. They also did much to advance campaigns to end female seclusion, win legal rights to women, and open educational and career opportunities to them. Of course, those are positive. Those are good. I suppose those. I support those. Those are good. I have no problem, no quarrel there. Those are good. The attempts by the nationalists in the late 1920s and 30s to reverse many of the gains made by women in the early revolution brought many women into the communist camp. Led by Chiang's wife, Madame Chiang Kai-shek, the nationalists' counter-offensive, like comparable movements in the fascist countries of Europe at the time, tried to return Chinese women to the home on earth. Madame Chiang proclaimed a special Good Mother's Day and declared that for women, virtue was more important than learning. That's good. She taught that it was immoral for a wife to criticize her husband, an ethical precept she herself ignored regularly. The nationalist campaign to restore Chinese women to their traditional domestic roles and dependence on men contrasted sharply with the communist extensive employment of women to advance the revolutionary cause. Women served as teachers, nurses, spies, truck drivers, and laborers on projects ranging from growing food to building machine gun bunkers, although the party preferred to use them in these support roles. In moments of crisis, women became soldiers on the front lines. Many won distinction for their bravery under fire. Some rose to become cadre leaders, and many were prominent in the anti-landlord campaign's agrarian reform. Their contribution to the victory of the revolutionary cause bore out Mao's early dictum that the energies and talents of women had to be harnessed to the national cause because women hold up half of the heavens. Women hold up half of the heavens. Michael Manley did come in with some revolutionary um, measures where he championed and legislated equal pay for women. It's amazing. Women, a man and a woman would be employed on the farm to work, and they were both doing the same thing. Yet the man got more money, earned more than a woman. Equal pay for women. So women hold up half of the heavens. As was the case in many other African and Asian countries, the victory of the revolution brought women legal equality with men, in itself a revolutionary development in a society such as China's. For example, women were given the right to choose their marriage partners without familial interference. But arranged marriages persist today, especially in rural areas, and the need to have party approval for all marriages is a new form of control. In 1949, women have also been expected to work outside the home. Their opportunities for education and professional careers have improved greatly. As in other socialist states, however, openings for employment outside the home have proved to be a burden for Chinese women. Until the 1970s, traditional attitudes toward child rearing and home care prevailed. As a result, women were required not only to hold down a regular job, but also to raise a family, cook meals, clean, and shop, all without the benefit of the modern appliances available in Western societies. Although many women held cadre posts at the middle and lower levels of the party and bureaucracy, the upper echelons of both were overwhelmingly controlled by men. As in other developing societies, the short lived but impressive power amassed by Mao's wife, Jiang Qing, in the early 1970s runs counter to the overall predominance of men in politics and the military, like her counterparts elsewhere in Africa and Asia. Jiang Qing got to the top because she was married to Mao. She exercised power mainly in his name and was toppled soon after his death when she tried to rule in her own right. Women have come far in China, but as is the case in most other societies in both the developed and developing worlds, they have not attained full equality with men in terms of career opportunities, social status, or political power. We're going to look briefly at women in the revolutionary struggle. Even more than in the nationalist movements in colonized areas such as India and Egypt, women were drawn into large numbers into revolutionary struggles in areas such as China and Vietnam. The breakdown of the political and social systems weakened the legal and family restrictions that had subordinated women and limited their career choices. The collapse of the Confucian order also ushered in decades of severe crisis and brutal conflict in which women's survival depended on their assumption of radically new roles and their active involvement in revolutionary activities. The following quotations are taken from Vietnamese and Chinese revolutionary writings and interviews with women involved in the revolutionary movements in each country. They express women's goals, their struggle to be taken seriously in the uncharacteristic political roles they had assumed, and some of the many ways women found self respect and redress for their grievances as a result of the changes wrought by the spread of the new social order. One, women must first of all be masters of themselves. They must strive to become skilled workers, and at the same time, they must strictly observe family planning. Another major question is the responsibility of husbands to help their wives look after children and other housework. Two, we intellectuals had had little contact with the peasants, and when we first walked through the village in our Chinese gowns or skirts, the people would just stare at us and talk behind our backs. When the village head beat gongs to call out the women to the meeting we were holding for them, only men and old women came, but no young ones. Later we found out that the landlords and rich peasants had spread standards among the masses, saying, "They are a pack of wild women. The words are not for young brides to hear." Wow. Women have come far away. There ain't no turning back. They have come a far way. A far way. There ain't no going back. Women have come a far way. When you look at Mao's last, and it's a sub point, Mao's last campaign and the fall of the Gang of Four. Sound interesting. Sound interesting. Having lost his position as head of state, but still the most powerful and popular leader in the Communist Party, Mao worked throughout the early 1960s to establish grassroots support for yet another renewal of the revolutionary struggle. He fiercely opposed the efforts of Zheng Qianping and his pragmatist allies to scale back the communes, promote peasant production and what were in effect private plots, and push economic growth over political orthodoxy. Mhm. By late 1965, Mao was convinced that its support among the students, peasants, and military was strong enough to launch what would turn out to be his last campaign, the Cultural Revolution. With mass student demonstrations paving the way, he launched an all out assault on the capitalist rulers in the party. Waving little red books of Mao's pronouncements on all manner of issues, the infamous Red Guard student brigades publicly ridiculed and abused Mao's political rivals. Liu Shaokui was killed, Deng Xiaoping was imprisoned, and Zhou Enlai was driven into seclusion. The aroused students and the rank and file of the People's Liberation Army were used to pull down the bureaucrats from their positions of power and privilege. College professors, plant managers, and the children of the bureaucratic elite were berated and forced to confess publicly their many crimes against the people. Those who were not imprisoned or more rarely killed were forced to do manual labor in rural communes to enable them to understand the hardships endured by China's peasantry. In cities such as Shanghai, workers seized control of the factories and local bureaucracy. As Mao had hoped, the centralized state and, technocrat and technocratic elites had that had grown steadily since the first revolution, won power in 1949, were being torn apart by the rage of the people. However satisfying for advocates of continuing revolution such as Mao, it was soon clear that the Cultural Revolution threatened to return China to the chaos and vulnerability of the pre-revolutionary era. The rank and file threat to the leaders of the People's Liberation Army eventually proved decisive in prompting countermeasures that forced Mao to call off the campaign by late 1968. '65 to '66, '66 to '67, '67, '68, '68. The heads of the armed forces moved to bring the rank and file back into line. The student and worker movements were disbanded and in some cases forcibly repressed. By the early 1970s, Mao's old rivals had begun to surface again. For the next half decade, a hard fought struggle was waged at the upper levels of the party and the army for control of the government. The reconciliation between China and the United States that was renegotiated in the early 1970s suggested that, at least in foreign policy, the pragmatists were gaining the upper hand over the ideologues. Zheng's growing role in policy formation from 1973 onward also represented a major setback in Jiang Qing, who led the notorious Gang of Four that increasingly contested power on behalf of the aging Mao. The death in the early 1976 of Zhou Enlai, who was second only to Mao in stature as a revolutionary hero and who had consistently backed the pragmatists, appeared to be a major blow to those whom the Gang of Four had marked out as the capitalist rulers and betrayers of the revolution. But Mao's death later in the same year, which was 1976, I went into Bible college in 1975, cleared the way for an open clash between the rival factions. While the Gang of Four plotted to seize control of the government, the pragmatists acted in alliance with some of the more influential military leaders. The Gang of Four were arrested, and their supporters' attempts to foment popular insurrections were foiled easily. Later tried for their crimes against the people, Jiang Qing and the members of her clique were purged from the party and imprisoned for life after their death sentences were commuted. So Jiang Ping Jiang Ping was fixed. Whoa. Eh, that interesting. When we come back, we pick up from there. We pick up from there. Jiang Ping, Mao's wife, was purged and put under heavy manners, in prison for life, and their supporters and followers were neutralized, and all the protest, plans for protest, were dashed. Good. Do your reflection and email me. God bless you.